Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So today's video is about locations with disturbing backstories. It can include anything from a house, an hospital, or even some open fields. Basically any place as long as it has an eerie backstory. Now a lot of times they appear to be completely innocent or normal looking, and at other times they look creepy, but have backstories, which are even creepier. And one last thing before we start is that I actually got the idea for this video from False Shepherd's comment. He comments on every video, and I think he noticed that my photos with backstories videos usually do better. So I should do more icebergs, which are about backstories, whether it's images or something else. So False Shepherd, if you're watching, let's see how this video does. And also, I hope you don't mind me mentioning you in this video. Anyway, this intro got pretty long, you guys, so sorry about that. And let's begin the video now with the first location in this iceberg. At first glance, 8763 Wonderland Avenue in Laurel Canyon, Los Angeles, appears to be an ordinary suburban home. It's a white, split-level house with 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms, blending in with its quiet neighborhood. However, this unassuming residence became infamous as the site of one of Los Angeles' most horrifying unsolved crimes. On July 1st, 1981, the bodies of 4 individuals were discovered inside, so savagely beaten they were unrecognizable. The story of this house's dark history begins in the late 1970s when it was rented by Joy Miller. Over time, it became a hub for one of the most lucrative cocaine and heroin distribution operations in the city. Joy began a relationship with gang member Billy DeVerel, and their group, known as the Wonderland Gang, soon established itself as a feared entity. Ron Launius, the gang's leader, lived there with his wife Susan, alongside other associates, including the notorious adult film star John Holmes and David Lind. Scott Thorson, famously known as Liberace's former lover, was also connected to the gang. The gang gained a reputation for robbing rival criminals, and their most infamous heist occurred on June 29, 1981, when 4 gang members broke into the home of Eddie Nash, a notorious nightclub owner and crime boss. During the robbery, Nash's bodyguard was injured, and the gang made off with at least $1 million in cash, drugs, jewelry, and firearms. This audacious crime set the stage for the tragedy that followed. 2 days later, on July 1st, neighbors called the police after hearing faint moaning from inside the house. When officers arrived, they found a blood-soaked scene of unimaginable brutality. Barbara Richardson, David Lynn's girlfriend, was found dead in a pool of blood near the couch where she had been sleeping. Joy Miller's lifeless body was discovered in her bed, while Billy DeVerel was slumped against a TV stand. In another bedroom, Ron Launius lay dead, his body battered beyond recognition. The bloodied crime scene also revealed several metal pipes and a hammer tangled in bed linens. The most chilling discovery was Susan Launius, lying on the floor near her deceased husband. Despite her skull being shattered, she was still alive, groaning in agony. Miraculously, she survived the attack, but suffered severe brain damage, leaving her with permanent amnesia and unable to recall the events of that night. Investigators later determined that she had likely been lying there for 12 hours before help arrived. A bloody handprint at the scene linked John Holmes to the murders, leading to his arrest and trial on 4 counts of murder. However, he was acquitted after the jury suspected he had been framed by Eddie Nash. Attention then shifted to Nash, but he too avoided conviction due to a hung jury. Years later, Nash confessed to bribing a juror during his trial, though he never admitted to orchestrating the killings. In 2000, Nash was finally imprisoned for unrelated charges, including drug trafficking and money laundering. Today, the unsolved Wonderland murders remain one of Hollywood's most infamous crimes. The house at 8763 Wonderland Avenue still stands and is now home to a married couple who often contend with tourists and true crime enthusiasts seeking to photograph the site of this gruesome and mysterious tragedy. Ed Geen's House of Horrors. Now the focus is on Ed Geen's infamous house and the grim motives that led him to adorn it with parts of his victims' bodies. Located in the secluded farmlands of Plainfield, Wisconsin, the farmhouse was purchased in 1914 by Geen's mother, Augusta. At the time, Ed was just 8 years old. Augusta, a devout Lutheran, intentionally chose this isolated property to shield her sons from external influences, which she viewed as corrupting. Ed and his brother Henry rarely left the house except to attend school and were forbidden from forming friendships. Augusta frequently lectured her sons about the evils of the world, using the Bible as her tool of persuasion. Each afternoon, she would read from the Old Testament, often focusing on passages filled with violence, death, and divine punishment. In 1940, Geen's father passed away, and Henry began to question his mother's strict worldview, much to Ed's dismay. Then in 1944, while battling a brush fire together, Henry tragically lost his life under suspicious circumstances. Following Henry's death, Ed lived alone with his mother until she passed away in 1945, leaving him devastated and isolated in the eerie, dilapidated farmhouse. It was in this setting of loneliness and despair that Ed's horrifying spree began to take root. In 1957, Geen came under suspicion when Bernice Worden, a local hardware store owner, vanished. Police conducted a search of his property, and what they discovered was beyond macabre. Inside a shed, Worden's decapitated body was found, hanging upside down, her torso split open and hollowed of organs. Investigating the house itself revealed grotesque artifacts: human skin stretched across furniture, a lampshade crafted from flesh, and skulls mounted on bedposts. Some skulls had been converted into bowls, and one ceiling pull cord was fashioned from human lips. Among the horrors was the head of Mary Hogan, another missing woman, stashed in a paper bag. Geen had even created clothing from human remains, including a belt adorned with moles, a mammary vest made from a woman's torso, and socks stitched from human flesh. A collection of shrunken heads, which Geen had transformed into masks, added to the grotesque inventory. During police questioning, Geen confessed that after his mother's death, he began exhuming freshly buried middle-aged women from local cemeteries. He brought their bodies home to use their remains as materials for his grim decorations. His property was set to be auctioned. There were rumors it might become a morbid tourist attraction. However, on March 27, 1958, the farmhouse mysteriously burned to the ground. A road named after Ed Geen exists nearby, and the sprawling farmland surrounding the former house has never been fully investigated. 810N Linden Drive, Beverly Hills, California. This 7-bedroom mansion in Beverly Hills, recently sold for $17 million, hides a dark chapter in its history. In the 1940s, the property was leased by notorious gangster Bugsy Siegel for his girlfriend, Virginia Hill. By 1947, their relationship had soured, becoming volatile and tumultuous, and Hill moved out as the lease neared its expiration. On June 20, 1947, Siegel returned to the house to retrieve his personal belongings. That evening, as he sat in the living room reading the Los Angeles Times, an unknown assailant fired several shots through the window with a .30 caliber M1 carbine rifle. Siegel was struck 4 times, including 2 shots to the head and 2 to the face, killing him instantly. His associate, Alan Smiley, who was present at the time, was grazed by a bullet but survived. The assassination came just 6 months after Siegel had opened the Flamingo Hotel, a Las Vegas casino that laid the foundation for what would become the modern Las Vegas Strip. Though instrumental in the project, Siegel faced criticism from his East Coast backers due to escalating costs and delayed profits. His death marked the end of his tumultuous and violent career in organized crime. The murder shocked the public, but the case has remained unsolved. Theories about the motive abound. Some speculate that the East Coast crime syndicate, frustrated with Siegel's mismanagement of their investment, ordered the hit. Others suggest personal motives, such as retaliation by Virginia Hill's brother for Siegel's mistreatment of her. Given Siegel's long history of violent outbursts and numerous enemies, pinpointing a single perpetrator has proven impossible. The case remains open with the Beverly Hills Police Department, though it's unlikely the mystery will ever be solved. Today, the house continues to attract curiosity seekers, with visitors frequently stopping by to photograph the infamous location. While the living room where Siegel was killed has been renovated, it retains much of its original layout from that fateful night. La Isla de las Muñecas. Located about half an hour south of Mexico City in the wetlands of Xochimilco lies a small peninsula called La Isla de las Muñecas, the Island of the Dolls. While now a curious tourist destination, it holds a chilling legend that unnerves even the locals. Some boatmen eagerly ferry visitors to the island for a fee, while others refuse outright, citing deep-seated superstitions. What frightens them isn't the water or the swamp, it's what hangs from the trees. The island is part of a traditional agricultural system known as chinampa, where crops are grown on rectangular plots of fertile land built atop shallow lake beds. In the 1950s, this particular chinampa was owned by Don Julian Santana Barrera, a farmer who grew fruits and vegetables to sell at local markets. After a long day's work, he often relaxed by the lake with a bottle of pulque, a fermented agave drink. One evening, as he rested by the lake, he heard a little girl scream, "I want my doll," followed by splashing nearby. Too weary and intoxicated to investigate, he ignored it. Later, he found the girl's lifeless body at the water's edge, her doll nowhere in sight. Overcome with guilt and grief, Don Julian kept silent about the incident to avoid suspicion. Days later, while tending his crops, Don Julian heard a faint voice whispering, "Quiero mi muñeca, I want my doll." At first, he dismissed it as his imagination. But when the voice grew louder and seemed to follow him, he became terrified. That evening, he spotted a doll floating in the lake, eerily close to where the girl had drowned. Believing it to be a message from her restless spirit, he retrieved the doll and tied it to a tree as a peace offering. This marked the beginning of Don Julian's obsession. Haunted by the girl's voice and plagued by unrelenting guilt, he began collecting dolls, hanging them throughout the island to appease her spirit. Over the years, the island transformed, with hundreds of decaying, weathered dolls suspended in the trees, giving it an eerie and macabre appearance. Despite his efforts, the hauntings never ceased. Locals say Don Julian himself was later found dead near the same spot where he discovered the girl's body and her doll decades earlier. Some speculate he sought to tether his spirit to the island, hoping for eternal connection to the mysterious energy that lingered there. Iowa Axe Murder House. For skeptics of the supernatural, this might be the place to challenge your doubts. Spending just one night here could turn even the most skeptical into believers of the paranormal. The site in question is the infamous Villisca Axe Murder House in Iowa, the location of one of the most brutal murder cases in American history. On the night of June 10, 1912, Josiah Moore, his wife Sarah, their 4 children, and 2 young house guests, Lena and Ina Stillinger, were all mercilessly bludgeoned to death with an axe. Evidence found at the scene suggests that the killer may have hidden in the attic, biding their time while the family and guests fell asleep. 2 cigarette butts discovered in the attic hint at the killer's eerie patience before carrying out the massacre. The murders were committed with such force that the axe left gouges in the ceilings. In a downstairs guest room, investigators discovered a strange detail: a large slab of bacon placed near the bloody murder weapon and a broken keychain. In the kitchen, there was a chilling scene, a plate of food sitting next to a bowl filled with bloody water. Even more unsettling, the murderer draped clothing over the faces of the victims and covered every mirror and exposed window with cloths. Despite numerous suspects being investigated, the case remains unsolved to this day, and the killer lived out their life in anonymity. The house has since been preserved as a tourist attraction, meticulously restored to reflect how it appeared on that tragic night. It lacks modern amenities like electricity and running water. Paranormal investigators have frequently visited the property, and those brave enough to spend the night often report a heavy, oppressive feeling, particularly on the staircase leading to the bedrooms. Whether or not you believe the paranormal stories, the house's grim history and chilling atmosphere are undeniable. Sedlec Ossuary. Beneath the cemetery Church of All Saints in Sedlec, Czech Republic, lies the Sedlec Ossuary, a Roman Catholic chapel adorned entirely with human bones. Its haunting beauty stems from a history of piety, plague, and an unparalleled fascination with mortality. In the late 13th century, the abbot of Sedlec Monastery was sent to the Holy Land by King Ottokar of Bohemia. Upon his return, he brought back a pouch of earth from Golgotha, the site traditionally believed to be where Christ was crucified. He scattered the soil over the abbey cemetery, making Sedlec a sought-after burial site in Christendom. This sanctified land drew countless burials, But the Black Death in the mid-14th century and the Hussite Wars of the 15th century brought unprecedented waves of death. By 1511, the cemetery was overwhelmed. To address the space shortage, a half-blind monk began the grim task of exhuming skeletal remains, stacking them in the ossuary below. For centuries, these remains lay in disordered heaps, until 1870. That year, a woodcarver named František Rint was commissioned to transform the ossuary into something extraordinary. Using thousands of bones, Rint meticulously decorated the chapel, creating chandeliers, candelabras, and even a replica of the Schwarzenberg family crest, honoring his patrons. To ensure his macabre work would be remembered, Rint signed his creation, using bones, of course. Alex Murdaugh's Moselle family estate. Nestled within a sprawling 1,772-acre hunting lodge in rural Colleton County, South Carolina, the Moselle estate was once the crown jewel of Alex's life as a wealthy heir to a prominent legal dynasty. But behind its picturesque exterior lay a dark tapestry of tragedy, deception, and murder. The estate's grim history began in 2018 with the mysterious death of longtime housekeeper Gloria Satterfield. He claimed she had tripped over the family's dogs and fallen down the stairs, resulting in fatal injuries. This tragedy, however, became a vehicle for fraud when Murdaugh pocketed millions from an insurance settlement intended for Satterfield's grieving family. The darkest chapter unfolded on June 7, 2021. At 10:07 p.m., he called 911, reporting he had discovered the lifeless bodies of his wife, Maggie, and son, Paul, near the estate's dog kennels. Both had been brutally shot multiple times with different firearms. Murdaugh claimed he was visiting his mother, who suffers from dementia, at the time of the murders. However, investigations uncovered damning evidence. Cell phone data, including a video recorded minutes before the killings, placed him at the crime scene. This revelation, paired with his inconsistent statements, marked him as a suspect. Yet, it took over a year before he was formally charged in July 2022 with the murders of Maggie and Paul, as well as weapon-related offenses. The case only deepened in complexity when it emerged that he had staged an unsuccessful attempt on his own life, allegedly to secure a life insurance payout for his surviving son. Meanwhile, authorities uncovered extensive financial crimes, including embezzling millions from his law firm and clients. Dubbed the trial of the century, the court proceedings captivated the nation. While he pleaded not guilty to the murders, he admitted to fabricating alibis and lying to investigators. He also confessed to stealing from his clients and orchestrating the failed assassination plot, blaming his erratic behavior on a long-standing opioid addiction. On March 2, 2023, after less than 3 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict, guilty on all counts of murder and weapons possession. The trial's verdict, streamed live across major news networks, brought a dramatic conclusion to the saga. He received 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Now imprisoned in an 8x10 cell at McCormick Correctional Institution, Murdaugh lives a life far removed from the luxury and privilege he once enjoyed at Moselle. The estate itself remains a haunting reminder of betrayal, greed, and loss that will forever mark its history. The Scarecrows of Nagoro. Nestled on the Japanese island of Shikoku, there exists a small village in the Iya Valley called Nagoro. Situated along Route 439 in a secluded and mountainous region, this village once boasted a population of approximately 300 residents. However, by 2015, due to Japan's significant population decline, Nagoro's population had dwindled to a mere 35 individuals, dropping further to just 27 by September 2019. At first glance, a photograph of the area might suggest it captures a portion of these remaining inhabitants. But the unsettling truth is that none of the people in the image are real. In the early 2000s, a woman named Tsukimi Ayano, whose family had left the village when she was an infant, decided to return. Overwhelmed by the pervasive sense of desolation and the evident toll it had taken on the community, Tsukimi took it upon herself to counteract the loneliness. Her solution was unconventional yet profoundly symbolic. She began crafting eerily realistic scarecrows. Some were modeled after former residents who had either passed away or moved on. These figures were then strategically placed throughout Nagoro to create the illusion of a lively village. Tsukimi's unique project grew over the years, resulting in the creation of more than 400 scarecrows. Her work even inspired others to join in the endeavor. The now-defunct elementary school, which closed its doors in 2012, has become home to numerous scarecrows. Elsewhere in the village, various groups of scarecrows tell silent stories. 3 figures sit beneath a telephone pole on the village's outskirts. One mimics a man fishing in the river, while others appear gathered at a bus stop or performing roadwork. These human-like figures are scattered throughout the village, blending eerily into the environment. While the village and its scarecrows are not intended to instill fear, encountering Nagoro without prior knowledge of its history could undoubtedly leave an unnerving impression. Unit 731. At first glance, the unassuming ruins of Unit 731 might look like any other historical site. Their stone foundations and columns reminiscent of ancient ruins like Pompeii or the Acropolis. Yet this facility, located near Harbin in mainland China, holds one of the most chilling backstories in human history. Known officially as Unit 731, it served as the Imperial Japanese Army's hub for biological and chemical warfare research during the 1930s and 1940s. What happened within its walls was nothing short of nightmarish. The story of Unit 731 begins with Japan's invasion of Manchuria in 1931. After seizing control of the region and establishing the puppet state of Manchukuo, Japan sought ways to gain a military edge over its adversaries. Enter Surgeon General Shiro Ishii, a high-ranking officer obsessed with chemical and biological warfare. Inspired by Western nations' wartime experiments, Ishii convinced Japanese military leaders to fund a secret research program. What began at the Jongma prison camp, disguised as an epidemic prevention unit, escalated into the sprawling Unit 731 complex in Pingfang. Officially, it was a lumber mill. In reality, it was a factory of death. Prisoners, including Chinese civilians, political dissidents, and prisoners of war, were referred to as logs to dehumanize them. These individuals were subjected to horrifying experiments designed to develop biological weapons and study the limits of human endurance. Victims were intentionally infected with diseases like the bubonic plague, subjected to vivisection without anesthesia, and forced into pressure chambers to observe their bodies under extreme conditions. Others were exposed to chemical agents, including mustard gas, while researchers coldly documented their agonizing deaths. Perhaps most disturbing was the deliberate cruelty of the experiments. For example, limbs were frozen solid in sub-zero temperatures before being shattered to study frostbite. Infected fleas were bred and dropped over Chinese cities, causing deadly outbreaks of plague. Food rations laced with paratyphoid germs were distributed to starving populations, leading to mass fatalities. Unit 731's research even extended to the development of flea bombs and plans to unleash biological attacks on the United States, including a scheme to infect San Diego with the plague. While these plans were never realized, the atrocities committed in the name of scientific progress were staggering. When Japan surrendered in 1945, many involved in Unit 731 escaped justice. General Ishii and his team were granted immunity by U.S. authorities in exchange for their research data. The site has since been transformed into a museum, but the atrocities committed there make it one of the most disturbing locations on Earth. St. Mark's Road. The haunted house of St. Mark's Road in Bangalore, India, is one of the most talked-about buildings in the country for its eerie reputation. Built in 1943 by E.J. Voss, the house was gifted to his 2 unmarried daughters, Vera and Dolce. The sisters lived peacefully in the home for decades, but tragedy struck on the morning of September 4, 2002, when Dolce was sadly killed by an unknown intruder in front of her sister. Heartbroken, Vera had her sister's final resting place within the property. Since then, many locals have claimed that strange happenings began to occur around the house. Passers-by reported hearing unexplained screams and experiencing unsettling sensations when walking near the property. Some even described being pushed or feeling an invisible force around the building. Despite being listed for sale, the house remained unoccupied due to its haunted reputation. Eventually, the property was demolished, but even the land where it once stood is said to carry an air of mystery. Many people believe it continues to hold negative energy, making it nearly impossible to sell. One account, shared by a nearby resident, adds to the intrigue. While heading to a restaurant with friends on St. Mark's Road, she had to pass by the site of the former house after being separated from her group. At first, nothing seemed unusual. However, upon arriving at the restaurant, her friends noticed a large red mark on her back that hadn't been there earlier. She believes the experience might be tied to the unsettling history of the house. 942 Beachcomber Lane. On the surface, 942 Beachcomber Lane in Clear Lake, Houston, appears to be an unassuming suburban home, but its tragic history reveals a far darker story. This house became infamous as the site of one of the most horrifying family murders in American history, where Andrea Yates, a mother of 5, drowned her children in the family bathtub. Andrea Kennedy married Russell Yates, a NASA engineer, in 1993. The couple shared deeply religious beliefs and vowed to have as many children as God would allow. Over the next several years, they welcomed 5 children into their family, despite Andrea's increasingly severe battles with postpartum depression and psychosis. Following the birth of their 4th child, Andrea's psychiatrist strongly advised against having more children due to her fragile mental state. Tragically, this warning went unheeded, and in March 2000, Andrea gave birth to their 5th child. Initially, she seemed to be coping well, but the death of her father in March 2001 triggered a downward spiral. Grieving deeply, Andrea stopped taking her prescribed medication and began experiencing suicidal thoughts and worsening psychosis. She was hospitalized multiple times, and her medical team urged Russell to provide constant supervision, a recommendation that was unfortunately ignored. On June 20, 2001, Russell left for work as usual, leaving Andrea at home with the children. His mother was expected to arrive within the hour to help. In that brief window, Andrea's psychosis overtook her, and she drowned all 5 children in the bathtub. Her first victims were John 5, Paul 3, and Luke 2. After killing them, she laid their bodies on her bed. Next, she drowned her 6-month-old daughter Mary and placed the infant in the arms of her eldest son, 7-year-old Noah, whom she killed last. Noah attempted to flee, but tragically did not escape. Andrea left his body floating in the water. After the murders, Andrea calmly called 911, requesting police but refusing to explain why. She then phoned her husband, urging him to return home immediately. When officers arrived, they found the devastating scene. Andrea confessed to the killings without hesitation, describing how she had prepared by filling the bathtub in advance and locking the family dog in a kennel to prevent interference. Her actions revealed a chilling level of premeditation. During psychiatric evaluations, Andrea explained her belief that she was saving her children from eternal damnation. Influenced by her mental illness and the teachings of a radical preacher, Michael Wawroniecki, she believed killing them before they became sinful would secure their salvation. Furthermore, she thought her own death would defeat Satan. In her 2002 trial, Andrea was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to life in prison, with parole eligibility in 2041. However, the conviction was overturned in 2005 after false testimony from a prosecution expert was uncovered. In a retrial, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity and committed to the Kerrville State Hospital, a mental health facility. Although her case is reviewed annually, Andrea has consistently declined release, stating she wishes to remain institutionalized. It is likely she will spend the rest of her life in care, haunted by the events at 942 Beachcomber Lane. The Cursed Mansion. In the affluent neighborhood of Los Feliz, Los Angeles, a multi-million-dollar mansion has sat largely abandoned for decades. This reputation of being cursed traces back nearly a century to the home's first residents. The home's original owners, Harold and Florence Schumacher, moved in full of hope, but within just 3 years, both had tragically passed away. This marked the beginning of the home's dark legacy. The subsequent owner, magazine editor W. Ford Beaton, also suffered misfortune when his son died in the house shortly before his 21st birthday. Within a year, Beaton himself declared bankruptcy, and the house changed hands once again. By 1959, the mansion was home to Dr. Harold Perelson, his wife Lillian, and their 3 children. On the night of December 6, 1959, this seemingly normal household became the scene of a horrific crime. Without warning, Dr. Perelson brutally murdered his wife with a ball-peen hammer while she slept. He then attacked his eldest daughter, 18-year-old Judy, but she miraculously escaped and alerted the police. When authorities arrived, they discovered the doctor's lifeless body next to his wife. He had ingested a lethal cocktail of tranquilizers and acid. The couple's two younger children, thankfully, were unharmed. The reasons for Dr. Perelson's violent breakdown remain unclear, though financial troubles and a history of mental health issues after World War II were cited as possible causes. Following the murder-suicide, the mansion was sold to Emily and Julian Enriquez in the 1960s. However, the couple never moved in, nor did they alter the house in any way. After their passing, their son inherited the mansion in 1994, but like his parents, he left it untouched. For decades, the house became a source of morbid curiosity for neighbors and visitors. Its dusty, decaying interior was a time capsule, seemingly frozen in the 1950s. Through its grime-covered windows, onlookers could spot eerie remnants, a vintage television, a Christmas tree, and wrapped presents still sitting as if waiting for a family gathering that never came. In 2016, the mansion was purchased by prominent civil rights attorney Lisa Bloom, known for her controversial work with Harvey Weinstein. Although she had the property completely renovated, there's no evidence she ever lived there. She eventually sold the house in 2020 for $2.4 million to a real estate investor. Despite its makeover, the mansion's dark past has continued to haunt it. At the time of writing, the property is reportedly at risk of foreclosure and scheduled for auction. Oradour-sur-Glane, the village left frozen in time. In the quiet countryside of France, many small towns bear the scars of World War II, their streets rebuilt and their lives slowly restored in the post-war years. But one village stands untouched, its ruins preserved as a haunting memorial. This is the story of Oradour-sur-Glane, a place forever marked by one of the most horrific massacres of the Nazi occupation. On the morning of June 10, 1944, an SS officer, Adolf Diekmann, was informed by French collaborators that a fellow officer was allegedly being held prisoner by the French resistance in the nearby village of Oradour-sur-Vayres. However, Diekmann and his troops mistakenly targeted Oradour-sur-Glane, sealing the fate of its unsuspecting residents. By midday, the village was surrounded. The SS ordered everyone, men, women, and children, to gather in the village square under the pretense of having their identity papers checked. What followed was a carefully orchestrated massacre. The men were separated from the women and children and led to 6 barns and sheds around the village. Without warning, hidden machine gun nests unleashed torrents of gunfire aimed at their legs to immobilize them. Once the men were unable to move, the SS doused them with fuel and set them ablaze. In total, 190 men perished in the inferno. Meanwhile, the women and children, locked inside the village church, faced an equally horrific fate. The SS placed an incendiary device in the church, and when it ignited, flames consumed the building. As the fire spread, the trapped women and children desperately tried to escape through doors and windows, only to be met by SS gunfire. Over 450 women and children were killed, with only one survivor, a 47-year-old woman named Marguerite Ruffanche. Marguerite managed to escape through a sacristy window and hid in nearby bushes overnight, wounded but alive. The SS spent the remainder of the day razing the village, determined to erase it from existence. The scale of the atrocity left a profound impact, with reports emerging of its barbarity. One particularly harrowing account came from Raymond J. Murphy, a young American navigator whose plane had been shot down weeks earlier. Murphy, who visited the site shortly after the massacre, described seeing the aftermath, including the body of a crucified baby. Though this detail remains debated, it underscores the profound horror witnessed at Oradour-sur-Glane. After the war, General Charles de Gaulle made a poignant decision. Oradour-sur-Glane would not be rebuilt. Nearby, a new village was constructed, but the original Oradour-sur-Glane, with its crumbling walls and rusting remnants, stands frozen in time. Jonestown. The thought of the houses in Jonestown, where hundreds of people once lived before their tragic deaths, is deeply eerie. In 1955, Jim Jones established the People's Temple, a religious movement that blended elements of Christianity with socialist ideology and racial equality. Over time, Jones became a controversial figure, yet he managed to amass a loyal following. In 1974, he secured a lease for 3,800 acres of dense jungle in northwestern Guyana. This land would become Jonestown, a settlement he promoted as a utopian refuge from media scrutiny and societal oppression. Jones encouraged his followers to leave their homes in the United States and move to this remote sanctuary. However, the reality fell far short of his promises. Upon arrival, residents faced harsh conditions, stifling heat, swarms of insects, and a complete lack of privacy. What had been described as a socialist paradise turned out to be little more than an oppressive, isolated commune. By 1978, nearly 1,000 people had relocated to Jonestown. They endured grueling labor in the snake-infested fields, with food supplies often running low. Despite these hardships, many remained loyal to Jones, who appeared to have deeply indoctrinated them. However, a growing number began questioning their circumstances, alarmed by Jones's increasingly erratic and authoritarian behavior. In November 1978, U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan traveled to Guyana to investigate claims that some People's Temple members were being held against their will. Accompanied by journalists, concerned relatives, and aides, Ryan visited Jonestown and spoke with several members. Some expressed a desire to leave, and Ryan arranged for a group of defectors to escape. This act enraged Jones, who ordered gunmen to intercept Ryan's group at the airstrip. The attackers killed Ryan, 3 journalists, and a defecting member. Back in Jonestown, Jones addressed his followers, urging them to commit what he called revolutionary suicide. His chilling words, captured on audio, declared, "We've had as much of this world as we're going to get. Let's be done with it." Jones ordered the preparation of a lethal concoction of cyanide mixed with flavored drink, often misremembered as Kool-Aid. Over 900 people perished, including more than 300 children. Those who resisted were forcibly injected with poison. Jones himself was found dead from a gunshot wound, believed to be self-inflicted. The tragedy marked the largest loss of American civilian life in a deliberate act until the events of September 11, 2001. Today, a memorial in Oakland, California honors the victims, but no such tribute exists at the Jonestown site. After the massacre, the compound was abandoned, and the Guyanese government briefly allowed refugees to occupy it in the early 1980s. Eventually, the structures were looted, burned, and reclaimed by the jungle. In 2003, a television crew, marking the 25th anniversary of the massacre, filmed at the overgrown site, finding remnants of the past, including an animal pen and other haunting artifacts. Most of Jonestown's buildings, including the shared dormitories and the radio room from which Jones broadcasted his propaganda, have long since deteriorated. Rumors persist of tunnels built beneath the compound, allegedly stocked with gold for survival in the nuclear apocalypse Jones had predicted. Tragically, many of the victims remain forgotten. Of the 900 who perished, over 400 were never claimed and were interred in a mass grave in Oakland. In 2014, the remains of 5 victims were discovered in an abandoned mortuary in Delaware, where they had been left for 36 years. In January 1994, Nicole Brown Simpson moved into a 3-story rental townhouse at 875 South Bundy Drive in Brentwood, California. The move came after years of turmoil following her divorce from O.J. Simpson, the former NFL star turned actor. Their marriage had been fraught with allegations of domestic violence, leading to multiple police interventions. Although divorced in 1992, their relationship remained complicated, marked by attempts at reconciliation and accusations of stalking. By April of that year, Nicole seemed to be rebuilding her life. She befriended 25-year-old Ron Goldman, a waiter at a local restaurant, and they shared a platonic bond, occasionally meeting for meals. O.J. remained a presence in Nicole's life, and when she fell ill with pneumonia, he stepped in to care for her, hinting at their ongoing connection. On June 12, 1994, Nicole dined with her mother at Mezzaluna, the restaurant where Goldman worked. Later that evening, Nicole called the restaurant to retrieve her mother's forgotten glasses. Ron Goldman volunteered to return them to her home, a decision that would tragically cost him his life. In the early hours of June 13th, Nicole and Goldman were found brutally murdered outside her home. Nicole had suffered 7 stab wounds to her head and neck, with a deep slash across her throat nearly decapitating her. Defensive wounds on her hands indicated a desperate struggle. Goldman had also been stabbed multiple times in the neck, chest, and abdomen and bore similar defensive injuries. Investigators believe Goldman was an unfortunate bystander killed to eliminate a witness. O.J. Simpson quickly became the primary suspect. After agreeing to surrender on June 17th, he instead led police on a bizarre low-speed chase through Los Angeles in a white Ford Bronco driven by his friend and former teammate, Al Cowlings. During the pursuit, Simpson reportedly held a gun to his head, threatening suicide. He was eventually apprehended and charged with the murders of Nicole and Goldman. Simpson's trial, often referred to as the trial of the century, captivated the nation. The 9-month legal spectacle culminated in his controversial acquittal on October 3, 1995, despite significant public skepticism. However, a subsequent civil trial found Simpson liable for the wrongful deaths, and he was ordered to pay $33.5 million in damages to the victims' families. In the years that followed, Simpson faced additional legal troubles. In 2007, he was convicted of armed robbery and kidnapping in Las Vegas, resulting in a 33-year prison sentence. He was released on parole in 2017 and passed away from cancer in February 2024. The townhouse at 875 South Bundy Drive sat vacant for 2 years after the murders. In 1997, new owners renovated the property, altering the landscaping to obscure the crime scene and officially changing the address. 25 Cromwell Street, Gloucester. Nestled in an ordinary street just minutes from Gloucester city centre in England, the row of 3-story terraced houses seems unremarkable. But among them stood one of the most infamous locations in British crime history, 25 Cromwell Street, also known as the House of Horrors. This was the family home of Fred and Rose West, a couple responsible for some of the most grotesque crimes of the 20th century. Within its walls and beneath its grounds, the remains of numerous women they murdered were discovered, including their 15-year-old daughter, Heather West. 5 young women were buried in the cellar, encased in cement. Heather and 2 other victims were interred in the garden under a patio. The body of 19-year-old Linda Guff was found in an inspection pit beneath the garage, which the Wests had converted into a bathroom. After the couple's arrest in 1994, investigators exhumed 3 additional bodies from locations across Gloucester, including Fred's first wife, Rena, and his 8-year-old stepdaughter, Charmaine. Authorities believe there were more victims, but their remains have never been located. Fred West died by suicide while on remand at HM Prison, Birmingham, on January 1, 1995. At the time of his death, he and Rose were jointly charged with 9 murders, and Fred faced charges for 3 additional killings. Later that year, Rose was convicted of 10 murders and sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order, ensuring she will never be released. She is currently incarcerated at HM Prison New Hall in West Yorkshire. During the investigation, the house was meticulously dismantled in the search for victims. In 1996, Gloucester City Council compulsorily purchased and demolished the property, citing both its structural instability and its unwelcome status as a dark tourist attraction. Today, the site is a tree-lined walkway with no memorial to the victims who suffered and died there. Benedict Canyon Drive. This charming yellow-painted 1930s house on Benedict Canyon Drive carries a sinister history. It was once home to Susan Jane Berman, the daughter of David Berman, a Jewish-American mobster and a key figure in organized crime. Susan pursued her education at UCLA, where she formed a close friendship with Robert Durst, the real estate heir who later gained infamy after being charged with her murder in 2015, a mystery that had remained unsolved for years. On December 24, 2000, Susan was found dead in her home, killed execution-style with a 9mm handgun. Authorities determined she had been deceased for about 24 hours by the time her body was discovered. Despite the grim circumstances, the investigation into her death stalled and remained cold for over a decade. In 2015, the case was revived when Robert Durst, her longtime friend who had walked her down the aisle at her wedding in 1984, was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Durst had come under scrutiny not only for Susan's death but also for the disappearance of his first wife, Kathleen McCormack, in 1982, and the killing of his neighbor Morris Black in 2001. While Durst was acquitted of Black's murder in 2003, his ties to Susan's death raised significant suspicion. Records revealed that he had been in California shortly before her murder and had flown back to New York the night before her body was discovered. The motive for Susan's murder is believed to involve her knowledge of Kathleen McCormack's disappearance. As one of Durst's closest confidants, Susan is thought to have known critical information about Kathleen's fate. Earlier in 2000, New York State Police reopened their investigation into Kathleen's case. Friends of Susan had urged authorities to contact her for information, but just weeks after the case gained renewed attention, Susan was killed. Notably, she had previously provided Durst with a public alibi following Kathleen's disappearance. On September 17, 2021, Durst was convicted of Susan Berman's murder. He was also charged in connection with Kathleen McCormack's disappearance, but he died of cardiac arrest on January 10, 2022, before he could stand trial. The Benedict Canyon Drive property, steeped in this dark history, was last sold in 2005 for $905,000. Sunnybank Road. This 5-bedroom property on Sunnybank Road in Helmshaw, England, is situated in a prestigious area, but its serene appearance masks a horrifying crime. It was here, on January 14, 2016, that Sadie Hartley was brutally murdered in a meticulously premeditated attack. That evening, at around 8 p.m., Sadie was home alone when she answered a knock at the door. Moments later, she was incapacitated with a 500,000-volt stun gun and stabbed 40 times in an assault described as demonic savagery. The following day, concerned coworkers reported her missing when she failed to show up for work or respond to messages. Police were dispatched to her home, where they discovered her lifeless body. Sadie's partner, Ian Johnston, was out of town on a ski trip, leaving police to focus their investigation elsewhere. Suspicion soon turned to Ian's ex-girlfriend, Sarah Williams, who was arrested 3 days after the murder, despite her claims of innocence. Her friend and accomplice, Katrina Walsh, was arrested the following day, and the pair were charged with Sadie's murder. The investigation uncovered an elaborate and chilling plot that had been in the making for 18 months. Williams and Walsh tracked Ian's movements by placing a GPS tracker on his car to locate his new home with Sadie. They conducted surveillance trips using vehicles with false plates and went to extreme lengths to avoid detection, including purchasing oversized boots to disguise their footprints. The stun gun used in the attack was imported from Germany, adding another layer of premeditation to their crime. Walsh kept detailed diaries documenting their plans, which proved damning in court. Surveillance footage, number plate recognition data, and mobile phone records cemented the case against the two women. Both were convicted of Sadie's murder and sentenced to life in prison. Sadie's home, once a scene of unspeakable violence, was placed on the market later that year and sold in 2016 for £500,000. 16 Wardle Brook Avenue, Manchester. Nestled in Hattersley, near the Cheshire town of Hyde, 16 Wardle Brook Avenue once appeared to be an unremarkable council house. Yet beneath its ordinary exterior lay a chilling history tied to two of Britain's most infamous murderers, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. By June 1963, Brady and Hindley had already killed 3 children, 16-year-old Pauline Reed, 12-year-old John Kilbride, and 12-year-old Keith Bennett, burying their bodies on Saddleworth Moor. In 1964, they moved to 16 Wardle Brook Avenue as part of Manchester's post-war slum clearances. Hindley eagerly decorated their new home, but what unfolded within its walls was nothing short of a nightmare. On December 26, 1964, Brady and Hindley attended a funfair in Ancoats and noticed 10-year-old Leslie Ann Downey, who seemed to be alone. They lured her into their car under the pretense of needing help with shopping bags and brought her back to Wardle Brook Avenue. There, they subjected her to unspeakable abuse, recording her cries for her mother during the attack. After killing her, they buried her body in a shallow grave on Saddleworth Moor. Less than a year later, on October 6, 1965, the pair abducted 17-year-old Edward Evans. Brady bludgeoned Evans with a hatchet and strangled him with an electrical cord in the living room. Hindley's brother-in-law, David Smith, witnessed the aftermath, including the body wrapped in plastic and stored in the spare bedroom. Overwhelmed with guilt, Smith alerted the police the following day, leading to the arrests of Brady and Hindley. Both were convicted of multiple murders in 1966 and sentenced to life imprisonment. Years later, in 1985, Brady confessed to the murders of Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett, prompting authorities to reopen the investigation. Hindley eventually confessed as well, and the bodies of Pauline Reed, Leslie Ann Downey, and John Kilbride were recovered from Saddleworth Moor. Tragically, despite extensive searches, Keith Bennett's remains have never been found. Hindley remained in prison until her death in 2002, at the age of 60. Brady, diagnosed as a psychopath in 1985, died in 2017 at age 79 after serving 51 years in custody. Following the trial, Manchester City Council struggled to find tenants for 16 Wardle Brook Avenue. The property was frequently vandalized, with messages scrawled on its windows. In response, the council demolished the house, leaving the land vacant. Today, the site is part of the garden of a neighboring property, house number 14. Despite the house's absence, curious visitors still come to glimpse the plot where one of Britain's most infamous murder houses once stood. 4 Hartland House, Camden. In January 2002, the police were called to Hartland House, a block of flats on Royal College Street in Camden, London, following a report from a resident about vandalism to her front door. The resident suspected her neighbor, Anthony Hardy, who lived in flat 4. When police entered Hardy's flat, they discovered the dead body of 38-year-old sex worker Sally White, lying on a bed with visible cuts and bruises on her head. However, forensic pathologist Freddie Patel controversially concluded that Sally had died of a heart attack, a finding later disputed. Hardy was not charged with her death at the time, though he was detained under the Mental Health Act due to unrelated criminal damage charges. Hardy was released in November 2002, returning to his flat. Shortly after, a homeless man searching through rubbish bins in Camden made a gruesome discovery: dismembered body parts wrapped in black bin liners. These remains were later identified as 29-year-old Elizabeth Valid and 34-year-old Bridget McLennan, both sex workers. A police investigation led to Hardy's arrest, and forensic evidence tied him to the murders of Valad and McLennan, as well as to the earlier death of Sally White. Under interrogation, Hardy remained silent, answering no comment to every question. Nevertheless, he was charged with all 3 murders. At his trial in November 2003, Hardy unexpectedly pled guilty to all counts and was sentenced to life imprisonment. In 2010, he was officially diagnosed with a personality disorder, and a high court ruling ensured he would never be released. Hardy, who became known as the Camden Ripper, died of pneumonia on November 25, 2020, at the age of 69, while incarcerated at HMP Franklin in County Durham. Though convicted of 3 murders, Hardy is suspected of killing at least 2 sex workers, whose remains were found in the River Thames, as well as several other unsolved murders of young women. Despite public protests, Flat 4 in Hartland House was eventually refurbished and relet, potentially to an unsuspecting tenant. Homfield Court Flats, Thornton Road, Bradford, UK. In 2010, the caretaker of Homfield Court Flats in Bradford sat down to review CCTV footage, expecting to find evidence of vandalism and petty crime. Instead, he witnessed a horrifying scene unfold. On the footage, a man was seen chasing a woman down a corridor, knocking her unconscious, and returning moments later with a crossbow. The man fired a bolt into her head before dragging her body out of view. Subsequent footage showed him repeatedly leaving and returning with bin bags and a backpack. Shocked, the caretaker contacted West Yorkshire Police. Authorities were already investigating the disappearances of 3 local sex workers and feared they were dealing with another serial killer in Bradford. The man in the footage was quickly identified as Stephen Griffiths, a 40-year-old resident of Holmfield Court. Griffiths, a criminology PhD student at Bradford University, had a dark fascination with serial killers, particularly Jack the Ripper. Described as a loner with a history of mental health issues, he had previously spent time in a psychiatric hospital. He maintained an eerie online presence under the pseudonym Ven Pariah, where he posted cryptic and unsettling statements such as, "I am a pseudo-human at best, a demon at worst." When police searched his flat, they uncovered bizarre and gruesome details. Griffiths kept 2 large monitor lizards as pets, feeding them rats stored in a trunk. Neighbors recalled him walking the lizards in the building's corridors and described his peculiar behavior, including wearing a long black leather coat and being active at odd hours. The investigation took a grim turn when body parts belonging to missing sex worker Suzanne Blamires, 36, were found in the River Aire near Shipley. Her remains were linked to the disappearances of Shelley Armitage and Susan Rushworth, 2 other workers. In Griffith's flat, detectives uncovered further evidence tying him to the murders. During his trial in May 2010, Griffiths gave himself the moniker the Crossbow Cannibal, claiming to have eaten parts of his victim's flesh, which he described as part of the magic. On December 21, 2010, he pled guilty to the murders of Blamires, Armitage, and Rushworth, and was sentenced to a whole life order, ensuring he will never be released. Though he initially confessed to killing 5 individuals, he later ceased cooperating with authorities, leaving the true number of his victims unknown. Homfield Court Flats remains standing and occupied, though it's unclear if Griffith's former flat has been rented since these chilling events. Ripper Summerdale Avenue in Norwood Park. Located at 8215 W Summerdale Avenue in Norwood Park Township, Chicago, Illinois, this seemingly typical 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house hides a chilling secret beneath its unassuming exterior. Built in 1996, the property sits on a site that once housed one of the most infamous locations in American criminal history, the former home of serial killer John Wayne Gacy. Between 1972 and 1978, Gacy, known as the Killer Clown for his performances at children's parties, orchestrated a reign of terror that resulted in the deaths of at least 33 young men and boys. His crimes were carried out within the walls of his ranch-style house. Gacy lured his victims with promises of work or tricks, often convincing them to try on handcuffs as part of a magic trick. Once restrained, his victims were subjected to unspeakable torture before being murdered, typically through asphyxiation or strangulation. The aftermath was even more horrifying. Gacy buried 26 of his victims in the crawl space beneath his home, with 3 others interred elsewhere on the property. 4 additional victims were discarded in the nearby Des Plaines River. Following his arrest in 1978, Gacy was convicted of 33 murders and sentenced to death in 1980. His execution by lethal injection occurred on May 10, 1994, at the Stateville Correctional Center. His final words, defiant and cold, were reportedly, "Kiss my..." In 1979, authorities demolished Gacy's House of Horrors. Years later, in 1986, the current brick home was constructed on the site. Living on the grounds of one of America's most notorious murder sites is an unsettling prospect for many. Interestingly, the address of the new house differs slightly from its predecessor, switching from 8213 to 8215 W Summerdale Avenue. Columbia Boulevard. This 1936 colonial-style home on Columbia Boulevard in Silver Spring, Maryland, boasts 3 bedrooms and a spacious backyard, making it an ideal family residence, except for its chilling history. Nicknamed the Homicide House, the property was the site of 3 murders between 2002 and 2010. The home's infamy began on August 6, 2002, when Greg Russell and his 9-year-old daughter Erica Smith were killed in a brutal home invasion. The attacker, Anthony Kelly, broke in disguised with a wig and fake beard, shooting Erica and Greg, who was hit 6 times, before fleeing with only a $3 copy of the New Testament. Kelly was later convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment. Years later, in April 2010, Brian Betts, the home's next owner, was murdered in the same house. Brian had unknowingly purchased the property where the double homicide occurred and had reportedly tried to back out of the deal upon learning of its past. Tragically, on April 14, 2010, after meeting 18-year-old Alan Saunders via a chat line, Betts was shot and killed during a robbery orchestrated by Saunders and 3 other teens. Saunders was also convicted and sentenced to life behind bars. Following Betts's death, his family pushed for the property to be demolished, but it was instead returned to the bank and listed for sale in April 2011. Maryland state law doesn't require real estate agents to disclose past homicides, which may have contributed to the house's eventual sale. In an effort to distance the home from its notorious reputation, the property's address number was changed in 2012 to obscure its connection to the high-profile murders. At first glance, the white duplex at 12205 Imperial Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio, seemed unremarkable. Anthony Sowell, the man who had lived there since 2005, was a former Marine. Neighbors often saw him sitting on the front steps with a beer in hand, occasionally accompanied by women or hosting barbecues. Despite being described as down on his luck, Sowell was known as polite and non-confrontational. However, an unpleasant odor emanating from his home drew occasional complaints. What the neighborhood didn't realize was that the smell was far more sinister than they could have imagined. Unbeknownst to most, Sowell was a registered sex offender. He had served 15 years in prison for kidnapping, rape, and attempted rape, only to return to live in his deceased father's house after his release. In October 2009, Sowell's dark secrets began to unravel when Latundra Bipps accepted an invitation to his home. What started as a casual encounter turned violent, with Sowell actually assaulting her. Bipps managed to escape and reported the attack to the police, prompting an investigation. On October 29, 2009, officers arrived at Sowell's home with an arrest warrant. Though he wasn't present, what they discovered inside shocked the nation. A search of the property revealed a horrifying scene: the remains of 2 women buried in the basement, along with a skull wrapped in a bucket. Additional searches uncovered 4 more bodies hidden in crawl spaces, 3 buried in the backyard, and parts of another victim scattered throughout the property. In total, 11 women's remains were found. Forensic analysis revealed that most of the victims had been strangled, with several still gagged and bound when discovered. Each woman had suffered horrific sexual assaults before their deaths. The victims, aged 25 to 53, were mothers and had histories of drug addiction, which Sowell exploited to lure them to his home. 3 additional women came forward, revealing that Sowell had raped them but allowed them to survive. Dubbed the Cleveland Strangler, Sowell faced 11 counts of aggravated murder, along with 74 additional charges, including rape, kidnapping, tampering with evidence, and corpse abuse. On July 22, 2011, he was convicted of nearly all charges and sentenced to death on August 12, 2011. Following Sowell's conviction, the house at 12205 Imperial Avenue was demolished by city officials to erase the grim reminders of his crimes. In its place, a memorial garden was established to honor the 11 victims. Anthony Sowell remained on death row at the Chillicothe Correctional Institution until his death on February 8, 2021, from an unspecified terminal illness. Houses of Horror. 2 otherwise unremarkable homes in London's suburbs conceal a chilling past, as both served as the settings for the gruesome crimes of one of Britain's most notorious serial killers, Dennis Nilsen. The first, located at 195 Melrose Avenue in Cricklewood, northwest London, became the stage for Nilsen's horrifying spree. Renting a flat there in 1978, he murdered his first victim, later going on to kill at least 12 more young men within its walls. Nilsen concealed their bodies beneath the floorboards, but the growing stench of decay eventually forced him to act. He dismembered the corpses and burned the remains on a communal bonfire, adding a car tire to mask the smell of burning flesh. By mid-1981, Nilsen was forced to vacate Melrose Avenue when his landlord decided to renovate the property. The day before leaving, he destroyed the last of the evidence by burning the remaining body parts, again using a tire to disguise the odor. Nilsen relocated to 23D Cranley Gardens in the Muswell Hill area of North London on October 5, 1981. This attic flat lacked access to a garden or space to conceal bodies, but it didn't stop his killings. Between 1982 and 1983, Nilsen murdered additional victims there. Lacking alternatives, he devised grotesque methods of disposal, boiling heads, hands, and feet to remove flesh and flushing the remnants down the toilet. The plumbing system, however, couldn't handle this grisly activity. On February 4, 1983, Nilsen himself complained to his property managers about blocked drains, describing the situation intolerable. A few days later, workers from a drain clearing company arrived to investigate. Upon opening a drain cover outside the property, they discovered flesh-like substances and small bones. Suspecting they were human remains, they alerted the police. A pathologist confirmed the remains were human, and they were traced back to Nilsen's top-floor flat. When officers arrived to question him, they were immediately struck by the overpowering odor of decomposition. A search revealed more human remains, and Nilsen was arrested. During his transport to the police station, an officer asked whether the remains belonged to one or two individuals. Nilsen's chilling reply, 15 or 16 since 1978. Nilsen's trial began on October 24, 1983. He faced 6 counts of murder and 2 of attempted murder, pleading not guilty by reason of diminished responsibility. The jury, however, found him guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to life imprisonment, initially with a minimum term of 25 years. This was later changed to a whole life tariff in 1994, ensuring he would never be released. Nilsen spent the rest of his life in prison, eventually dying at age 72 on May 12, 2018, at HMP Full Sutton. Lower Belgrave Street. Nestled in the upscale Belgravia area of London, a flat on Lower Belgrave Street appears as unremarkable as any other in the neighborhood. However, its history is far from ordinary, as it became the backdrop for one of Britain's most enduring mysteries, the disappearance of Lord Lucan. Lord Lucan married Veronica Duncan in 1963, and the couple had 3 children together. However, their relationship deteriorated, and they divorced in 1972 after 9 years of marriage. A contentious custody battle followed, which Lord Lucan ultimately lost. This loss is thought to have fueled his obsession with reclaiming his children, setting the stage for the tragic events of November 7, 1974. On that fateful night, Veronica and the family's nanny, Sandra Rivet, were attacked in the basement of the house. Sandra was tragically killed, while Veronica, though injured, managed to escape and later identified Lucan as the assailant. Before authorities could apprehend him, Lucan fled. He was last seen driving a borrowed car to a friend's house. The car was later found abandoned, containing a lead pipe similar to the weapon used in the attack and bearing traces of blood. Despite these clues, Lucan himself had vanished. Speculation about Lucan's fate has run rampant ever since. Many believe he took his life shortly after the incident, while others suggest he fled abroad. Over the years, alleged sightings have been reported in countries such as France and New Zealand. In the late 1970s, Scotland Yard even investigated the possibility that he was living in South America, supported financially by a friend. Despite these leads, Lucan's whereabouts remain a mystery to this day. Though he disappeared, Lucan has never been cleared as the prime suspect in Sandra's death. His ex-wife, Lady Lucan, passed away in 2017 at the age of 80. The flat on Lower Belgrave Street, where Sandra Rivet lost her life, is now estimated to be worth between £4 million and £5 million, but its current ownership and status remain unclear. Mount Pleasant Cottage, Scenes, Powys, Mid Wales, nestled in the serene Welsh countryside, became the epicenter of one of the UK's most devastating child disappearance cases, the abduction and murder of 5-year-old April Jones. On the evening of October 1, 2012, April begged her parents for permission to play outside with friends, despite the late hour. Reluctantly, her mother allowed her to go, with the instruction not to stay out too long. Around 7:15 p.m., April was last seen playing at the Brynigog estate in Machynlleth. Shortly after, a young witness reported seeing her willingly climb into a gray van. When April failed to return, her mother raised the alarm, and a massive search effort ensued. The community rallied, with hundreds of volunteers joining local authorities in the hunt, spurred by social media and public appeals. Even then, Prime Minister David Cameron issued a plea for her safe return. The search quickly became the largest missing person operation in UK history. Attention soon turned to Mark Bridger, a local man who matched the description of the individual last seen with April. On October 6th, despite the absence of a body, Bridger was arrested and charged with abduction, murder, and attempting to pervert the course of justice. During the investigation, Mount Pleasant Cottage, Bridger's home, revealed chilling evidence. Forensic experts discovered small fragments of bone in the fireplace, consistent with a child, and blood matching April's DNA on various surfaces. These grim discoveries led authorities to believe Bridger had murdered April, her body, and disposed of her remains across the countryside. On May 30, 2013, Bridger was convicted of all charges and sentenced to life imprisonment with a whole life order, ensuring he would never be released. Despite overwhelming evidence, Bridger refused to disclose the location of April's body. In 2014, Mount Pleasant Cottage was purchased by the Welsh government and demolished that November, as a gesture of closure for April's grieving family. Her parents watched as the house was razed to the ground. Though April's body was never fully recovered, 17 fragments of bone found in Bridger's fireplace were buried in a funeral service held on September 26, 2013.